Hello everyone, I hope you guys are doing well. Welcome back to Educational Snap channel. How you doing? So I wanted to discuss a deck I built, probably due to the tournament kind of revving up my engines of deck building and really designing things. But I wanted to make a deck that could deal with the meta right now, deal with High Evolutionary, deal with Galactus, deal with Kitty Bounce, all that kind of stuff. And I think I have a pretty good list. Pretty happy with it, so I wanted to share it with you guys. Let's begin. So the theme of the list, I wanted a deck that could kind of take advantage of Iron Lad while also being able to do a lot of work in a lot of the other matchups. And this is what I end up coming up with. Really like what it does and all the pieces of the deck. I think it kind of flows together really well. Gives you a lot of options and has some game plans. So right now, High Evolutionary, right, Hulk is like the main issue, the main target. There's a lot of danger with that. I'm liking the Goose here. I think Goose is maybe a little underutilized, but the way it kind of synergizes here is it's a pretty good tech into Galactus, pretty good tech into the Hulks, where a lot of people are just playing Hulk and doing that kind of thing. So you can kind of see where they want to be playing their Hulks. A lot of times they'll be playing it into maybe an empty location or things like that. So what you can do is kind of get ahead of that and drop down the Goose. Turn 5 if you need to, but you can play it on turn 2 based on the matchups. Also, it's just like a good, oh, you can't play Galactus in this lane. So that's another thing you can do here. I really think it just has a lot of good tools, good matchups right now. So really like the Goose. Really think it makes a lot of sense into the meta. So playing with it, and it felt really good. Next up, we have the Darkhawk piece. I'm pretty like confident, like adding Darkhawk if you don't know what to do is like really powerful. So like Zabu, Darkhawk, and Rockslide, I think everyone knows how good they can be when they work together. They're just a really nice tech option that gives you a lot of tools to have power, have pressure, and really contest some matchups. It's also really nice into Thanos. That's another thing that I like about Darkhawk. Anytime someone's playing Thanos, you have this like tool. Also, Rockslide has a lot of uses into Lockjaw and things like that. So it's just a really nice tech piece. So I always like adding that if I can. I think it works generally well. Now, the Zabu, not saying I wouldn't play Iron Lad without it. Iron Lad came in first, but I added the other pieces afterwards. But Iron Lad, I just think has a lot of good hits here. I'm really big fan of Doctor Doom, so I always try to add this if I can. And then Klaw, right, is something I will talk about, but I think it's also a really nice hit here. Professor X is a good hit. Rockslide, Spider-Man, like all of the hits are good, which is something you really have to do or really have to be aware of with Iron Lad. Some people have Iron Lad's index where a lot of their hits don't really make sense or don't fit the composition they need or could mess you up. And I really think there's not really any like horrible hits with Iron Lad, so definitely pretty solid about that choice. And then Klaw, I think, has to be talked about at some point because it's a unique lit card. But I think the fact that it's unique, the fact that it's unusual is actually going to give you the edge. No one really plays around it. And there's just been so many games that I'm watching and or playing where I'm thinking to myself, Klaw actually wins here when nothing else wins. Or Klaw is something they will never see coming. And if I play a Klaw here, I'll just subvert them and get a win here. So a lot of people like playing Lockdown. Lockdown seems to be pretty popular right now, where they're locking a location, just like hoping you can't do anything like that. Doctor Doom obviously is pretty good into Spider-Man Lockdown or Storm Lockdown, but when it comes to Professor X Lockdown, you kind of have struggles because you can't really affect it easily. Obviously, I have Jeff. So Jeff can do that, but Klaw is another way of getting into those locations that are locked down, and it's the type of card when, if played correctly, can get you those 8 cube wins, can get you those 4 cube wins because they assume they've won and you subvert their expectations with the Klaw. So it's just a sneaky surprise card. I always talk in deck building, if you are going to be proficient in that, you want to be having things that people won't expect, because if they know every card in your list because of the meta list, then those those surprises fall off. Now, the problem with deck building is that by sharing it, you lose the surprise. People are going to know this deck list, right? So people are going to be like, oh, they might have a Klaw. Da, da, da. So that's the issue of sharing decks, but still the idea is still the same. And even if they know you have a Klaw, it doesn't, like, it's still a good card. Like, it's not a bad card. 5 power, 10 power split into 2. You can see how good Doctor Doom is, right? 6 power, 15 to split into 3. You can see how powerful that can be, how game changing and meta defining it can be. So same thing here with the Klaw. Just a really good card. I've always talked about it as one of my favorite cards. It's just hard to sometimes put in a deck because there's so many other cards you want to put in. But I think this is a pretty good meta. It is right. People are playing Storm. People are playing Professor X, and you can just mess with that. Now, in terms of Galactus, right, we have Professor X for the Galactus matchup, but it's also just a generally good card here with a Jeff. So Professor X Jeff is just a very nice combo. It lets you play the Professor X and not have to worry. But let's say people wave you and you're thinking, oh, they're going to Galactus in this particular lane. You just play the Professor X and you get ahead of that. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I lose the Galactus matchup, because that's something you always have to think about. How do you deal against High Evolutionary? How do you deal against Galactus? How do you deal against Bounce? Those are really probably the 3 most common archetypes you're going to see. And this really does work with the Wave. Wave is for the Bounce. Wave is for the people flooding matchups. If people are still playing the Jeff Stature decks, things like that. If you know they're wanting to do a lot of big combos in the final turn, Wave can just shut that down. As well as you can tempo Wave if need be and just follow up with a Doctor Doom. And then you still have a lot of other power picks to play in the final turns, as well as if you have Zabu set up, you can play 3 on the last turn. So you're not really limited by that late Doctor Doom. That's not your only play. Klaw is strong, double 4 strong. So it still has a lot of power to play. And then we have Killmonger here. So a lot of people are running Nebula, a lot of people are running Sunspot due to High Evolutionary. So the Killmongers do deal with that. Also into Patron matchups, you do have the Killmonger for a little bit late game. Another thing that's pretty good into the Patron matchup is a Professor X. So Professor X, right? A lot of Patron decks are stacking a lane and then trying to rely on Ultron, trying to rely on those Doctor Dooms to really get you that win. So you can do the Professor X early and then lock their weakest lane, and you have the Jeff to kind of deal with that. And Klaw, if things go horribly awry, but usually that won't be the case. And you can do things like, wave into Professor X if you know the matchup is Patriot already. So there's definitely some strategies to be utilized there. It's as usual with my type of decks, it's pretty pilot dependent. So if you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know your matchups, you don't know how to play decks, it's going to not feel super good. But I think I've been playing with it, and it's definitely felt really strong. It's definitely felt like I could deal with a lot of the meta. And people have been asking me nonstop, like, hey, do you have an answer to High Evolutionary? I couldn't afford it, or I don't want it, and I want to play something that could deal with it. Now, the problem with me making a deck that can deal with High Evolutionary is that it loses to a lot of the other decks. It loses to Galactus sometimes. It'll lose to Bounce and the other things, right? It's hard to kind of have this like perfect deck that beats every single archetype, right? A lot of times things are rock, paper, scissors-esque, with our game plans being so dramatically different from each other. So I do think this list does hit a lot of the pieces that you want and has good matchups into a lot of different archetypes. Now, I wouldn't say it beats everything perfectly, which, 60% win rate is like crazy. So I'm not saying that, but I do think you have the tools to at least compete in almost every matchup. So that's the difference there. And in terms of changing it up, right, there's the problem with this deck is maybe you could say it's expensive. So we have Jeff and we have Iron Lad, which are not common cards to have. And do I think you need those cards? Yes. I don't think you can just say, oh, replace Jeff with Nightcrawler or something like that. It's not the same. They don't do the same abilities, don't have the same impact in the games. And Iron Lad is just like a very nice tool for this particular deck. I wouldn't say you need Iron Lad, but it does make it feel good, because if your Iron Lad hits a Klaw, if your Iron Lad hits Professor X, if it hits Doom, if it hits Darkhawk, if it hits Rockslide, Spider-Man, like there's so many hits here that feel good. Jeff is also pretty good, I've noticed. Like anytime I hit the Jeff, it's like so free to mess with what your opponent wants to do. So I just think there's a really nice deck into the current landscape of the meta. I, you might ask, oh, could you play some games? And maybe I'll do that, but I was just playing off stream and just like testing it because of the tournament. Like I've been interested in doing a lot more testing and stuff like that. So this is just a new deck that I wanted to share with you. I'm not really focused on just keeping the secrets to myself. I want to share some of the ideas I have and kind of inform the community like, oh, this might be a good idea. And I really didn't see anyone running anything like this. And I could tell from the tournament, people just play meta in a lot of cases. So here's an idea. I think it works well. I think it fits the meta game pretty nicely. So test it out, see how it feels for you. If you don't like it, that's fine. But if you do, let me know. So take care of yourselves. That's my video for now. And then I'll see you in the next one. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be